Well, welcome everyone. As always, thanks for watching these mental health minis. Today, I'm absolutely delighted and grateful to be able to talk to former politician and former Norwich City chairman, Ed Balls, about his experiences with mental health. Ed, welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to be here. And it's really good that you're doing this in the trust.
Thank you so much. Hopefully we can just help people and people will see that they're not alone in this. So
Sure.
as always with these, the general idea is we talk about your experiences, we talk about things that have a positive or negative effect on you from day to day, any advice you can give. And I know there's a few angles you want to specifically cover that mean a lot to you. So as I always say, let's crack on. Talk to me about your experiences, Ed.
Well, I think when I think about kind of talking about mental health, I'm now in my early 50s. I don't think for most of my adult life this was ever a conversation that we had. And you're right. I did have a particular experience, which was that I had kind of a real struggle when I first became a cabinet minister, and I look back now and realize that was what we would now say a struggle with mental health, but I'm not sure I quite saw it that way at the time. This was at a time in the late first decade of the 2000s where people in politics didn't talk about mental health at all. I think one of the very first people to talk about his own challenges was Kevin Jones, who's a Northeast MP who talked very personally, powerfully, and I think that people sharing their experiences and explaining to others the struggles they've had and how they've dealt with them. That's been one of the kind of the great changes in the last 10 years. But when I was going through a challenging time, it was before that. It was before, discussion of mental health on television. And I didn't really know that that's what it was. What it was I had this real problem speaking, and which was quite challenging if you becoming a politician. I'd been at the Treasury for 10 years, and I knew that every now and then, when I was younger, my speech would go wrong. If I was making a speech in the debating society, if I had to read out something in class, I found it hard to get the words out. But that hadn't really been an issue for me for most of my adult professional life, because I didn't do a lot of public speaking. And then I got selected to be an MP in 2004, did my first Any Questions. It was the day after Tony Blair had announced, quite kind of controversially at the time, he was going to serve another full term. And I thought, a good answer about the sort of Blair-Brown relationship. And then as this Any Questions program went on, there was a question about, I can't remember what it was about. And I found it really hard to get the words out. The words just didn't come out. It was like I was blocking. And the next morning, I spoke to my dad on the phone. He was in Norwich. And he said, I heard you on Any Questions. And I don't know what it is that you've got, but it's the same thing as I've always had. And I think it might stop you really getting on in politics, because it's really hard. And at the time, this was like hugely unhelpful, because to say this to me, I didn't select as an MP. I didn't know what this thing was. He said he'd been struggling with all his adult life as a university lecturer at UEA and then Nottingham University. What was it? And that began a 3 or 4 year kind of fight to find out what was this thing. And I only found out after I'd been appointed to the cabinet as a cabinet minister. My first education questions, I'd had like 3 or 4 years where sometimes in interviews, the words would just sort of dry out. I could dry up. I couldn't get the words out. It was like things would really block, and it would happen live on television, and it was kind of very stressful, and I was kind of worrying about it. When I had to do things in the House of Commons, I was worrying about it. Sometimes the Conservatives would laugh at me over the chamber, kind of, yeah, I'll get your words out. And people said to me, is it about your breathing? And it was like a private thing which was happening in me, and I didn't know what it was. And so my first education questions, found it really hard to read out the words at the beginning. And I'm the cabinet minister in charge of all the schools in the country. And behind me, a Labour MP called Gwyneth Dunwoody just says very loudly in the chamber, he's the Secretary of State and he can't even get his words out. It's ridiculous. It like echoed across the chamber. And it was like I was failing on my first day. After that moment, the rest of the questions were fine, but I went back to the department and said, look, this is a huge problem. I've been struggling for 4 years. What is it? And one of my guys went off, came back 3 days later and said, "You've got a stammer." And I said, "I don't have a stammer because I don't stammer." And they said, "Well, honestly, we've looked into it. Read this on the British Stammering Association website." And I found this thing called an interiorized stammer. And it was described in detail that normally people think of a stammer as where you stammer and you can't get your words out. But a lot of people stammer in a different way. There are loads of people who will go through their whole life doing this, and they'll never talk to their loved ones, let alone their work colleagues, about it. And it's called an interiorized stammer, where sometimes you just can't manage to get the words to come. And I read this thing online by this American academic who said it was like an iceberg. He said there's this tiny little bit above the surface, and that's what people see, and you let other people see. And sometimes that's just the pause. But underneath the sea is this massive iceberg of tension and pressure and worry and fear. And I read this and thought, this is what I've spent years dealing with, and I never even knew. As I said to you, I don't think I would have thought, David, that at the time this was like a mental health issue. It was just this thing I struggled with. And so they said, you need therapy. And I said, "Look, I can't have therapy. I'm a cabinet minister. Cabinet ministers don't have therapy." As I said, this was 15 years ago, where it was just not the kind of thing that people talked about. But they said, honestly, you've got to. We found the right person, wonderful woman called Jan Logan. She came to see me in the department. She said, "It's definitely a stammer." I said, "Honestly, it's not a stammer. I don't think this is a stammer." She said, "Look, I'm the professional. It's a stammer." She said, "I do a 10-week course every Thursday evening. There'll be a group of 10 of you." She said, "It will get worse before it gets better, but I suggest you come along." I said, I'm a cabinet minister in the government in charge of education. I cannot come to some group. And it can't get worse. And so she said, "Well, okay, come and see me." And I went to see her in the end for about 3 years on a Tuesday morning. And she said to me the first week, "I promise you," she said, "this will only start to get better once you go public. You must speak about this publicly." And I said, "I can't do that because I'm in the cabinet, and people in the cabinet don't talk publicly about having therapy or something like a stammer." And she said, "Well, we can work together, but I think the going public will make the difference." And it took me 2 more years of this struggle, me resisting talking about it publicly. I used to practice, but I would practice in Parliament or live on television. I mean, that's how she would say, "Try this," and I would go and experiment with it. And then if it worked, I'd carry on doing it. I had loads and loads of devices. What I learned over that period, the technique we had was what people would call NLP. It's the same thing that Emi Buendia will use when he's taking a penalty. He cuts out the noise and focuses on the goal, and then remembers what it felt like last time he scored, and gets himself into that sort of zone. And I realized with my speech and performance, I was making 20, 30 speeches a week, that if I had done things before, and I could get my mind into the zone, and I could remember the last time it worked, and I could sort of, but it was terrible if I ever arrived at the last minute. I needed to have been in the room for a while. I needed to kind of get the feel, absorb, get some familiarity. I like to be able to feel as I was talking to people personally in the audience. I dropped ever using a script, and I learned all my speeches and would do them off the cuff, as it looked off the cuff. In fact, there was lots of preparation. And then finally, a moment came where I suddenly realized that things had to change. And it was an event for stammering children in a North London school, which I went to with Michael Palin, who played a stammerer in A Fish Called Wanda, famously. His dad had a really bad stammer. He felt terribly guilty about playing the stammerer. And so he ended up lending his name to the Michael Palin Centre for Stammering Children in North London. And I'd been a couple of times to visit. And, almost to get a bit of defenses in place, I told Michael Palin, I said privately, "I've got a stammer. Just want you to know." I told Nick Robinson from the BBC. I told the Speaker of the House of Commons, these was like my insurance policies. If it ever went wrong, I had sort of done some work. Some people knew. Obviously, I told Yvette knew all about it. I talked to her a lot. We went to this, we'd commissioned a video where children speak to teachers about their stammer. It was called Wait, Wait, I'm Not Finished Yet. And it was all these children, boys and girls, 8, 9, 10, 11, saying to the DVD, to teachers for teacher training, don't finish my words, don't interrupt me, give me the space to speak. And it was an incredibly moving video. I should have watched it in advance because it was kind of so affecting for me, because it was so much about how I'd experienced things, that they were willing to voice this challenge I faced inside. And afterwards, we had to do a chat with journalists, and one of the journalists said, by the way, he said, you've got a stammer. And I said, no, it's not really about me. It's about the children today, and don't want to talk about that. And he said, you are a coward. He said, I believe you're a coward. My son is in that video. He's aged 8 and he's speaking publicly about the challenges he faced, and you're covering it up. Why don't you give him a bit of support? Why don't you actually show people that you can do it and he can too? And I kind of walked out of this event thinking, I've been struggling in private. I thought that was the right thing to do. I thought to conceal was like the professional thing to do. I'm a coward. And it was really kind of quite shocking. I didn't realize that was not how I thought about it. And I went back and I wrote a letter to every one of the children in the video, saying to them, I have a stammer, and I'm a politician, and whatever you want to do, you can do, and I'm, how brave you are and how proud I am. And then I said to the department and to my therapist, I'm going to speak about this publicly. And the next week, I went on Good Morning Britain. It was called GMTV at the time, to talk about having a stammer. And before that, I did an interview with the Daily Telegraph with a journalist. My dad rang me on the Saturday and said, I've just read your interview in the Telegraph, and I've just realized that I've got a stammer too. And he was 71, and he found out I hadn't talked to him because it was too hard to talk about it. So I just sort of parked that for 4 years since that any questions moment. And he said, I've got a stammer. I didn't know. That's what we've been doing all these years. I said, I think this is right, Dad. I think that is the case. And the totally unexpected thing, I'm probably going on too long, but I'll say one more thing. Totally unexpected thing was, it was completely liberating, because suddenly this iceberg was like in full view, and the iceberg kind of melted with this sort of heat and glare of exposure. Suddenly, well, I told people about it now, so if it went wrong, well, I've been public now. I've done lots of things around stammering over the last few years, but there was this great moment when I'd been in touch with Colin Firth, because Colin Firth played the stammerer in the King's Speech.
Yeah.
Amazing. He wins an Oscar for this film, and I got in touch with him because Colin and I are now vice presidents of the children's stammering charity, Action Stammering Children. But I got in touch with him and we met, and I explained to him that I had a stammer and would he come and help us. And in this conversation, he talked about the king and how the king would have this front of respectability with his suit, take the photo before his speech. But it was on the radio. They could then throw out the cameraman. He could get relaxed. He can get into the zone. He could sort of do all those mental state things to get ready, deliver his speech. And Colin said that they found the diaries of his therapist towards the end of making the film. And the therapist describes the king's, one of his great war speeches after some time of therapy. And the king throws out the cameras, gets relaxed, delivers his speech, does really well, comes out. And Logue says to him, the therapist, that was really good, he said, but you did stammer on the W in the 3rd paragraph. And the king says, well, he said, I had to throw one in so that they knew it was really me. And I said to Colin Firth, that for a stammerer is the most affirming moment of the whole film. And Colin Firth found it. That's why he won the Oscar. Because what that says is, for me, all that concealment and all that covering up and all that struggle, all this kind of torment mean, it lifted once I decided that I should be myself and not try and cover up. And that actually, in the end, finding your authenticity is the most liberating thing. And it means you do things differently sometimes. And I find it really hard to read the Bible because that's the one thing you can't easily rewrite. People notice if you start rewriting the Bible. And lots of things which I've done since. I speak when I'm doing radio in a more colloquial way. Sometimes people will sort of send you tweets saying, I hate the fact that you say look at the beginning of sentences. But if you're a stammerer, to launch yourself in a sentence, you will often say, look, John, because that's the thing which gives you it's just one of the things I do. It's who I am. If you don't like it, forget it. And actually, I think, so I learned through that period. And so we're talking about 2009, 10, just at the point where people start to talk more openly, more broadly about mental health, people in public life. I think I went through a version of that in advance. And the moment people started talking, my reaction was, this will be hard. And the pressure you'll put yourself under deciding whether to do it is really difficult. But the reality is the liberation of revealing your authentic self is so good. And it's so, including all the bits which go wrong. And so ever since, when I talk a lot to people who stammer, but more generally, when you're talking to people in kind of professional life, creating a workplace environment where people feel comfortable in revealing who they are, and you having the confidence to say who you are and reveal that is what leads to, not only a better atmosphere, but better performance. I am undoubtedly a better media performer because I had a stammer and then found a way to authentically open up about it. I could never have done Strictly Come Dancing if I hadn't dealt with the stammer, because after the stammer, 10 million people live on television didn't seem as hard anymore. Now I would definitely choose to go through that again because it made me better at what I do. But fundamentally, it's about the authenticity and the openness and the honesty, which I fought against because I thought that would be weakening, and it was actually strengthening. And that's not to say, I'm not the same as lots of people, and sometimes being open can be very hard, and sometimes it can be very painful. So, but I would say at margin, my feeling is that deciding to be open and choosing as a leader or as a manager or whatever in a family to open up is the best thing you can do. Colin Firth and I often do, a few times we've done these 2 weeks courses where children and their teenagers come and can work on their stammer, and their parents come and do a 2-week course as well. And the hardest thing, especially for the dads, is to realize that all those years when they told their son or daughter not to do it, get a grip, when they pushed it away, they made it worse. And part of what the parent has to do is to realize that your willingness to provide an open environment is actually the thing which helps your child to succeed. And until then, you weren't helping. And so opening up can sometimes be as much about the person who is living with, working with, supporting somebody with a challenge as the person themselves. And so that's my experience.
Yeah, obviously you're very passionate about this. You've put yourself in a lot of positions, as you mentioned, being a politician, Strictly Come Dancing, where this would have come out anyway. So talking about it, and I think there's a thing you said there about opening up, and obviously not everyone is the same. We know this, but I agree with you. I'm stammering isn't something I've got, but I have other mental health issues, and the building up to tell someone that you're struggling is one of the worst feelings. But for me, I utterly agree with you. The liberation that you feel, the weight off your shoulders when you're finally able to talk about it and you don't have the anxiety and the stress about telling people is significant. I absolutely agree with you there.
Quite often the things which go wrong are not the thing itself. It's the things you do to try and cover up so that people don't actually see it. And it's actually when you can get all that encumbrance out of the way, it is liberating, and for me it was definitely less stressful, but it's really hard, and some people won't want to do it, and that's fine. My only thing I would say is I fought like mad not to for 6 years, and it was the best thing I did to go public.
I think I think you're right. Talking about it for most people, and that's what mental health campaigners say now, is if you can talk to someone. And I think you mentioned a really good point about how far we've come. We're not there yet by any stretch. There are still stigmas, but you talk about 15 years ago, it just wasn't the done thing to talk about it.
No.
Whereas now, obviously, we had the MP come out yesterday with PTSD, and people are more willing to go, I've got a problem, I need to deal with it. And what I found really lovely, yes, there were some people that were a bit not right about it, but the responses to this statement were mostly, yes, you're brilliant, fantastic. Even people going, I fundamentally disagree with everything about you on politics, but I want you to come back stronger. You can handle this. And it really was everyone going, this is a thing that needs to be dealt with. You're doing the right thing, regardless of their personal opinion on them. It was absolutely amazing to see that we've come so far. Yes, we're not there yet, but you yourself said 15 years ago you couldn't talk about it, and now you're very much open and willing to go, I've got an issue, let me deal with it.
I mean, it is an area where where I mean, I think in a way stammering is particularly challenging at the moment, because we're still not at the point where it's unacceptable to laugh. It's still okay, it seems, on television or in a film, to laugh at the person who stammers. People use the word stammer as a pejoratively. Oh, stop stuttering, stop stammering, a stuttering performance. But actually, and that isn't fair. We wouldn't. But kids were making those jokes in the playground about physical disabilities 30 years ago. So there is, I guess, the thing I feel is that none of us, there's no ideal. Everybody has a challenge and a particular thing about them which is different, and sometimes those things can be very hard, but one is who you are, and therefore the attempt to conceal that or to deny that adds to your stress, and secondly, the opening up, in my experience, you get a much more positive reaction than you expect, as you were just saying, and talking about those vulnerabilities can actually often end up making you better at what you do. That the strength you have to find to deal with it, if you channel it, can then help you to be stronger more generally. So if you take, I don't know, the football club, I mean, over 10 years, I mean, the extent to which we now support, our players in the academy through the development to the first team around much broader kind of life issues, the way we talk to them about diversity and discrimination, but also support them around kind of mental health. The reason we do that is not simply because societally we ought to, it's because actually they will be better professionally if they are the kind of people who can ask for help and explain when things are difficult. And so I'm sure that the culture which the football club has been building around openness makes us not only a more kind of honest and good football club, I think it adds to our professionalism as well. I mean, we've had managers in the past who would have clipped a young player who was stressed around the ear hole and told him to go home and come back tomorrow. But when I look at kind of the kind of supportive environment that Stuart and Daniel, every problem is there to be solved, and they're always looking for the thing which will make us stronger. And in so many walks of life, that's also true. So for me, these vulnerabilities are things which make you better if you can open up about them.
And I think from my own point of view, and this is a very much personal thing, I wouldn't suggest anyone else doing this unless they feel comfortable. Some of the issues I go through with, if I'm talking to the right person, like my best friend or my wife, I can almost have a laugh about them, because it's not that it's stupid by any stretch of the imagination, but it is it is something about me that's different, and I can almost like to, it makes me feel better about it. Now, I'm not saying everyone feels that way, but for me, that's how I deal with it.
Well, I am. So I spoke at the Labour Party conference live on television, 9 years running. First 3 years, I do it without a text. And there was one time where one of the sketch writers gave me a really hard time. Did he have an earpiece? Was somebody reading him the lines? Because it looked like at one moment the line went down. And the reason the line went down was because I just had a block for 10 seconds and he was laughing at me at that point. By the time I got to 3 or 4 years in, I was willing to talk about it. At one point, I talked about it and acknowledged it and said, so live on BBC Two would have been that, that I have a stammer. And I said, but I've had, a huge amount of support from friends and Yvette. And afterwards, a friend of mine was in the audience and they said they were listening to these two people talking. And one said, I never knew Ed Balls had a stammer. And the other said, I know, but why did you go to the vet? Why would you go to the vet with a stammer? And I'd said, I had lots of help from friends and a vet. And but actually that didn't mean a veterinary surgeon. And actually we laugh so much about that. Lots of friends, help from friends and a vet. And it's when you're laughing at the thing which you used to conceal and find painful that you're starting to make some progress.
I always conscious I want to keep these shorter, as we discussed before the call, to keep engagement.
I'm sorry, I probably talk too long. Once I start, sometimes you know what it's like. Sometimes when you're talking about things you've gone through, it's hard to stop. So I'm sorry about that.
No, absolutely. It was great to hear, and I wanted to say thank you for being so open, not just about the stammering, but about your history with it as well. And obviously there's lots more we could discuss, and if we can revisit this another time, that'd be great. I suppose one final thing, we've covered it a little bit, for anyone that might be struggling or anyone helping anyone that might be struggling, have you got any advice?
Well, I think sometimes people cannot even talk to the people closest to them, and people with a stammer can go through their whole lives never even revealing to their partner the stress they go through when they're at work. And so I think it's first of all, talking to your loved ones, and then having the confidence to look for external, I think, information first, try and understand. And there's lots of people who know far more, not just about the issue you're dealing with, but also they've had experience with other people. They can give you a perspective that you can't have just from yourself, and that takes away some of the loneliness. And then the extra thing I think is, if you can, getting to the point where you can speak about it, not just to the guys closest to you, but to colleagues and wider friends. I think if you can get there, and it's not right for everybody, my experience, not just with stammering, which I know about, but also more widely with the colleagues I've seen in Parliament, when people have talked about the challenges they've had with their mental health, in the end, they also feel liberated. And you take the time you need, and if it's not right for you, don't do it. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. There is that you don't have to struggle alone with that iceberg under the sea on your own. There are people who can help.
Absolutely, and I really like the iceberg analogy, because it really does. I've not heard that before, but it kind of does put quite a lot in perspective, actually. So, as I said, thank you so much for doing this for us. Hopefully, someone will see it, whether it be stammering or whether it be any mental health, see it and seek help if they need it. So, as always, there at the end of the video, you'll see lots of charities that are willing to help, and we'll be plugging some more of those on our Twitter account. So, thanks everyone for watching, and once again, Ed, thank you very much.
And thank you to the Trust for doing this. It's brilliant what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.